us talk about a very interesting topic today, and that is ethics and integrity, a very important part for your GS paper 4. So definitely we would be covering a lot of those, and in our previous sessions we have talked about a lot of topics on ethics. So just go back and check out our playlist for ethics to know more. Now let's first talk about integrity. What is integrity? Integrity comes from a Latin word which means integer, and that means whole. So whenever you are doing something, make sure you are doing right thing even when no one is around or no one is looking to you. And that was one of the famous definitions given by C.S. Lewis, and based on that we say or we understand what is integrity. So doing right even when no one is observing you is your integrity about doing something. So it's a kind of judgment call, what is wrong, what is right, what is wrong, what to do, what not to do, what you ought to do, and having proper work ethics is something that is very, very important. Now, based on this understanding, you had Citizens Charter that was released first in United Kingdom in 1991, and later it was adopted by a series of nations including India in 1997. The idea was to bring in good governance, and this good governance had three pillars, and that was known as the art of governance, ART. That is accountability, responsibility, and the transparency. So the three pillars become very, very important for any good governance to take place, be it a country like India, be it a country like UK or any other nations across the globe. Understanding the art of governance, which is, again I repeat, accountability, responsiveness or responsibilities, and finally transparency, is very, very crucial. So this initiative was started to understand the day-to-day problems an individual in a society faces and how public services can actually address those problems. So resolving the public grievances is one of the major aspects that is part of it. Now this could be in the form of service transactions, banking transactions, it could be in the form of grievance redressal as we said, or a kind of certain expectations that are to be held from clients or any other phenomena. So the 6 principles that are included under a citizens charter are important. It talks about maintaining good quality, choice, standards, value, accountability, and transparency. Now, the next important thing that we need to focus and to move out of the roots is corruption. So, if I simply want to define corruption, what it is? Corruption is misuse of public office for private gain. So, let's say I am in a government building and I am using the resources for my own purpose. So, it's a form of corruption. Even let's say if I am trying to take I am trying to take print out of the printer that is present in the office, that's a form of corruption. Now, how well you define it or how broadly you define it depends on how widely the corruption is present. The idea is to make the nation corruption free, we need to focus on having a transparent system, a proactive government, a fair system where you would have transparency and openness and accessibility for everyone. So what are the drawbacks that are usually pushing this corruption with deeper roots? Firstly, there is over-centralization of center and state responsibilities. As a result, with the outdated system and over-centralization, there is no checks. And since there are no further checks, there is high prevalence of corruptions that are seen. Similarly, sometimes government is not sensitive to the public grievances that are raised. So let's say we as a citizen, we raise certain issues, we raise certain grievances that the government must address. But in case government is insensitive to those grievances, that means there is some sort of corruption which is underlying. So making proper checks is another way to curb the corruption that is present, and this can come successfully with administration hand in hand with police, where there is lack of kind of partiality, or there is openness and unbiasedness that exists. Now, when we focus on ethics has a deeper root. It's not just in governance, but there is ethics in journalism as well. So journalism is known as the fourth estate, and Mahatma Gandhi rightly said the newspaper is one of the great powers. Now, you had one of the famous quotations in Hindi which says, "खींचो ना कमानों को न तलवार निकालो, जब तोप मुकाबिल हो तो अखबार निकालो." That talks about the voice of newspaper, the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, and this brings in a social responsibilities of the citizens as well as the journalists. So bringing the voice of voiceless is one of the major ideas that journalism focus on. So you have to have certain principles, standards, guidelines that needs to be set, and once these are respected by the citizens and there is credibility that is established, then and then we say journalism has good ethics. We can quote a very simple example. You have, let's say, 10 newspapers coming up. You have regional newspapers, you have English newspapers, you have Hindi newspapers coming up. But of all those newspapers, you are selective about choosing few newspapers, might be in English or might be in your regional language. Why so? Because over the generations, you have established a credibility, a faith on those newspapers, considering the fact that this has a reputation associated to it and it would not bring in fake news or false news with us. So there was a term yellow journalism which was very popular during the late 19th and 20th century, and it focused on the concepts where sensational or biased news or manipulated news were coming in. So there needs to be a check on journalism where it makes or it assures that the news that is coming in is good, it is transparent, it does not have biased views. Now how do we assure this? There have been various series of development in this line. So in 1922, you had American Society for Newspapers Editors, which adopted a paper which talked about Canons of Journalism, and this was later renamed as Statements of Principles. In 1975, you had 6 principles that were laid down. Now these were responsibility, freedom of press, independence, truth, impartiality, and fair play, which are very, very important to be a good to bring in a good journalism. And the idea was to basically reach each and every people, bring the voice of the voiceless, and also to bring in a general welfare. In 1940s, Hutchins Commission in United States talked about the social responsibility that press has, and there should be a kind of responsible behavior on behalf of the journalists before they are releasing the news. So in India, to understand this, we have the Press Council of India, which is a statutory quasi-judicial body. Now if you want to understand more about statutory, non-statutory, quasi-judicial bodies, we have covered those in a separate lecture. So just go back and refer those for more details. The idea is the press is basically working as a watchdog. So it is a watchdog of the press, for the press and by the press. The idea is to safeguard the freedom of the press and basically improve the quality. Now after, when we are talking about so long how the journalism has evolved, we need to understand there are certain issues that are underlying. Now these issues are, sometimes there are one-sided media, let's say a news channel covering only views of one political party, underlying or suppressing the views of other political party. Sometimes there are manipulative stories coming up, sometimes there are defamatory reports coming in. So all those campaigns, kind of biased campaigns, wrong information that is being broadcasted needs to be checked. Now how does this check come into play? One is through the Press Council of India we talked about. The next is the News Broadcasting Standard Authority, NBSA, which was established by NBA, the News Broadcasting Association, and it basically gives the code of ethics that newspapers have to follow. Now this is headed by one of the judges of Supreme Court along with the top editors of TV channels, and if any errand is found, you have fine up to 1 lakh that is imposed on the channels. Similarly, there is also regulation under Ministry of Information and Broadcasting under the Cable Televisions Regulation Act 1995, and it focuses on 2 codes, the Advertisers Code and the Program Code, that a news channel must adhere to, and there is a requirement to be a news channel to get a license before, and that license should be mainly for the program code. Again, one of the famous journalists has rightly quoted, no freedom is absolute. All freedom comes with reasonable restrictions and responsibilities. So, when we say we have freedom to speech, then the journalists basically are trying to say that there is no freedom which is absolute. There are reasonable restrictions that are there, and there are responsibilities because that information is being broadcasted to a huge set of people. Now, similar to understanding the ethics in journalism, we also need to know what is media governance. So basically now we are having 24/7 news channels, we are having regional newspapers, social media, and a lot of ways through which there is advancements in digitization and technology, which is basically broadcasting news at a much faster pace than it could have been at any point in time. So there needs to be regulatory conditions before the news comes into, and media should be very careful about a right kind of news being delivered to the people, because let's say if there is incorrect news, it could create issues related to two different caste groups, it could create issues related to two different religions, and there could be disturbance in the nation as a whole. So we need to understand right policy measures. Now for understanding right policy measures, there are a three-pronged strategy that is being talked about. So governance through the media. Now governance through the media focuses on the role of PIB, Prasar Bharati, for understanding and communicating the thoughts. Governance of the media talks about the policy actions, the regulations, the licensing that should be done, and governance as affected by the media. Now this talks about creative understanding of communication. So to achieve integrity, media governance and mediated governance is very important, and then only we can have a reassurance of a effective governance that can come into play. So the next important topic that we would understand is the public funding of election. Now over the period of independence since 1947, we had nearly 17 national elections and more than 350 state elections. Now, these elections needs to be free and fairly conducted. So, you have the Election Commission of India, which looks after the election process and the formulations of election. Recently, we now have, rather than the ballot post, we have the electronic voting machine to bring in more transparency and efficiency in the election process. Similarly, despite of all the successes that we have achieved in streamlining the elections, one of the major failures that we witness is criminalization in politics and a kind of runaway election expenditure. We have a ceiling on an individual spending for election campaigns, but not a ceiling for the party campaign. So that is again one of the drawbacks. Studies have revealed that nearly 88% of those who contest elections have assets more than 1 crore, and their probability of winning is nearly 21%. However, those with lesser assets have a probability of winning of only 1%. That means there is somewhere a loophole that exists. So ceiling needs to be checked very carefully, and as we have reported here, the reporting details of 20,000 plus must be given, but in 90% of the cases it's not so. So that is how we need to understand that there are still loopholes that needs to be checked. The next is the rule of law. Now why do laws come in and what is the basis for law? Now law is something which is within the society, it is an integral part of the society, it is something that you adhere to. So let's say you are walking on the street and there is a fine of throwing the waste on the road, then this is a law. If you do not abide by the law, you would have certain fines or certain challenges that you would have to face. So these are the vehicles or the drivers of social engineering and a kind of orderly functioning. So the states and the nations which impose strict laws have usually better results. We can compare India versus, let's say, UAE. So you would have strict rules, and as a result you would have better management that could be seen. Also, peace, justice, order and equality comes in hand with laws which are well defined. So laws basically define the structure of the government. First of all, it talks about the order contestations. That means who would take the accountability for, how the disputes would be resolved, how the things would be solved, and if there is no obedience of the law, that means there is rampant corruption that is there. So if there are certain laws, let's say we have traffic laws that are coming in and people are not wearing helmets, and there are charges that policeman is making, that means that money is going somewhere. Now the idea is to bring in more transparency. When we talk about rule of law, we focus on again the art of governance that we had talked about before. So that is bringing in more transparency, predictability, what could be next, a stable system of governance, and a kind of systematic process that could help you move through. Law also helps to promote, enforce, and protect individual rights as well. Now, before we begin understanding a very important study on corporate ethics, let's have a small story. Now, this is a very interesting story taken from Kurukshetra, however. So, you have a Kenyan runner. His name was Abel Mutai, and he was about to cross the finishing line in the race, but he got confused with the signs that were mentioned there, and he stopped before the crossing line was there. Okay, as a result, he thought that the race ends here and he stopped. The person who was behind him was a Spanish person, and he basically was continuously saying in Spanish, which the Kenyan runner could not understand, that the line has not come, run, 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 but he could not understand and he was standing there. So what this Spanish person did was, he just pushed him to help him cross the original line. Now when he was asked, why did you do so? If he stood there, you had the chance of winning the race. Why didn't you win the race? Why did you do so? So his response was really heart-touching. He said that it would not be my merit if I had done so, because he was the actual person who was running faster than me, and he actually deserves it. And what would my mother think when I would go back? So that was the kind of response that comes in, and that is what is ethics. Doing right when you know that you are surrounded by people, but still you have the energy to move forward in a correct way. So that is something that comes a very important way in corporate ethics. Now, when we talk about corporate ethics, we need to understand we have 3 levels of hierarchy. The managing authorities, which basically feel that how the thing should work. So they are the persons who are solving the day-to-day problems, and they should be very ethical. You have a middle layer, which is basically the shock absorber. Now this middle layer would absorb the shocks, whether they are right or whether they are wrong, and there would be a junior layer which would always look up to the managers to understand how to move forward when they would be the future managers. So it's very important that a good corporate is not only based on profit, but is based on good governance and strong ethics. Now let's say we take a simple example. Alcohol promotion is banned in India. Now let's say a company producing alcohol wants to market the product that they have. They can do it under the cover. They can talk about it in an indirect way and try to create a promotion. But yes, definitely it's unethical. It's not illegal, but it is unethical. So we understand the difference in terms of legalities and in terms of ethicality. So that is something that is very important. So code of conduct, mixing of the rules for good allegiance and adherence to those rules is very important, because you have a constant way where the things are being brought forward. We have certain very good examples for you to quote here. A good example is, let's say I am an employee with the government. I have my bills being reimbursed for medical purpose. Now, let's say the medical bills are worth 80,000, but when I claim, let's say 1,20,000. So where are these 40,000 gone? So that is where you have the ethics that come into play. Similarly, there could be an example where we are trying to understand a weaponization of the code of conduct. A simple form could be, how do we differentiate between a gift and a kind of bribery, we could say. So a simple example could be, at what time you are giving the gift. Let's say you have a senior boss and you feel that if you don't keep the boss happy, you would get transferred to another city. So what you do is, you off and on keep gifting the boss, or you bring in costly things for that. So you are trying to make your mind saying that no, what I am doing is right, I am giving the gift, but underlying might be it's a bribery. So you are not in a position to understand what you are doing is right or wrong, and that is where ethics play a major role. So when we talk about understanding this minor line or a difference between gift versus bribery, a good example or a good way of differentiating it could be, firstly, the timing of the gift. Let's say if it's a festive season, on the festivity you are going and meeting and giving a gift, that's fine. The next is the presence of obligations. How many obligations are you trying to take? Are you gifting something but in return you are not looking for any obligations from another person? Then it's totally fine. The next is whether it is given in an open environment. That means everyone knows that you have gifted something, or you are doing it in the chamber of the boss. So that means you are trying to hide it from your colleagues that you are trying to gift it, and that's might be is a kind of shift from gift to bribery. Similarly, whether it is disclosed within the organization, let's say you went out for a tour and you brought souvenirs for all the people in your company, so that's totally fine. But if it is bringing in accountability, whether you can bring in the accountability in the organization or not, that is again very, very important. So your ethics should be very, very strong. The sole idea of this whole lecture here is to understand how strong or how ethical you are, and the difference again between the ethics and morality we have covered in a separate lecture, so you can go back and refer that. The next is again very, very crucial component, and that is Gandhian ethics. Now, Gandhi basically talked about a relationship between spiritual aspects and material aspects, and his stories are definitely mind-blowing. His one of the studies quote that he was criticized a lot for not being a good father. You might think why? What he did was, his ashram had numerous students and his children used to be part of the same ashram where other children were being brought. And they used to share the same food, the same dwelling, and everything used to be the same. Now, in the ashram, once there was an opportunity for scholarship. So, rather than providing that scholarship to his own son, Mahatma Gandhi gave the scholarship to another deserving candidate, and he was obviously criticized a lot, saying that he is not a good father, he is not allowing his child to go for further studies abroad, but he gave it to a child who deserved more. So that is how we understand that ethics play a very, very important role despite of the criticism that might surround you. Now, Gandhi's 7 sins are important. His 7 sins focus on the following aspects: wealth without work. Okay, the next is pleasure without consciousness. The next is knowledge without character, commerce without morality, science without humanity, religion without sacrifice, and politics without principle. So those are the 7 principles, or his 7 sins, we would say, that he believed is very, very important to understand. And he also said some of the very unique concepts, that initially he was a person who viewed God as truth. But later on, he himself changed his mindset and said, it's not God as truth, rather it is truth is God. Similarly, he said that mind's man is a unique way. It can make heaven out of hell and hell out of heaven. So that is how we have our mindset that works, and he strongly recommended that all people, despite of the caste, class, gender, should be treated equally. So he was a voice for casteless, classless. He talked about equality of men and women. His idea was to wipe out tear from each and every eye, and there should be a room for dialogue. There should be dialogue and conversation before anything is actually executed, and everything that used to be done was principle centric. A lot of people have laughed about his concept of non-violence and gaining independence through non-violence. He was also criticized for the same, that this is something which is a midnight summer dream of many, and this is not practically possible, but this was something he achieved with his strong principles and morality. So that is how we understand the idea. His work on Sarvodaya Samaj, which focused on eliminating corruption, and Hindu Samaj, which talked about, which was highly criticized by people from industrialized world and people who were pro-mechanist, who believed that mechanization is the only way. But his idea was to give work to the poor and to have their livelihoods, not to snatch their livelihoods. Okay, the next important thing that we need to understand is accountability. So accountability means the process and the norms that make decision answerable to someone. So making things answerable is something which is accountable. So let's say if I am teaching something wrong, then I am answerable for it, or I should be answerable for it, and that is my accountability. It should not be based on certain other parameters. Now, accountability could be broadly classified as external accountability or internal accountability. External accountability is one which comes through election when we talk about nation as a whole, and internal accountability comes through certain checks and balances and a kind of oversight mechanism that you are trying to understand. So there is a kind of constant feedback between the government and an individual, and there are kind of improvement in the developments that are seen. So good example to understand this could be, let's say, Right to Information Act that came in 2004, that laid rights for each and every individual to go to a public office and ask for an explanation for the same. Similarly, you had the Central Board for Direct Tax, which gave the timelines for issue of refunds. You also had the taxpayers charter in the income tax, which was again a step forward towards gaining more accountability. So accountability can be in various forms. Financial accountability is again important. Let's say when you have budget that comes in, you have various schemes that are released, but ultimate execution of the schemes comes through the executive, and the formulation of the projects, the approval of the projects is something that comes into line here. So that is how we need to understand the process of transparency and good governance. Similarly, information sharing becomes a crucial role. Now, a good example could be government-led education management information system, which is the UDISE, which is the Unified District Information Sharing of Education, through which information is shared across the districts, and Karimnagar in Telangana is a leading example for improvement in results through this. Similarly, we have the EDS, the Electronic Delivery System, which talked about the online delivery of services in a timely process. Another important aspect is Trespass, which was released by Telangana State Building Corporation, and this talked about instant approval of up to 600 square yards of land, and if it is more than that, it should be within 21 days. So there have been developments across nation. If we talk about Denmark, Canada are leading examples. In Canada, you have open access to how the taxpayers' money is spent, and that is through the Employment and the Social Development Canada. Similarly, Denmark has highest accessibility of information on the public expenditure that is being done. So what is required is regularities, good good stakeholders, good monitoring and evaluation, which can ultimately lead a better way forward. Now, under the Independence Day speech highlights, you had some of the key things that we have brought up here. The key things focus on is make in India and make for the world. Then you have one nation, one ration, one nation, one tax. We also talk about the Sikkim growing as an organic state. Similar to that, Ladakh should be grown on the lines of carbon neutral region. We are also talking about after the release of Project Tiger and its successful mission, we are focusing on two new projects, which is Project Lion and Project Dolphin, that should be released. And similarly, we are also trying to bring in optic fiber connectivity to our islands, mainly Andaman, Nicobar and Lakshadweep. Similarly, we have the national education policy. Now, this is something that we have already covered in detail in our previous lectures. So just go back for our national education policy lectures. We have a series of 5 to 6 lectures across which we have covered all the details. But yes, a quick recap. After 1986, this is the first time we are having changes with the national education policy. The new structure is 5-3-3-4, that is initial 5 years, then 3 years, 3 years and 4 years from 9 to 12 would be taken under one head. Early child care and education. It is believed that 85% of the brain development occurs below 6 years of age. So good cognitive, intellectual and skill development is required, and good nutrition and nourishment is required during the initial 6 years of foundation. So this age is known as foundational age. Anganwadi, Balvatikas have been working for the same. Now the early childhood care system has been taken care by now Ministry of Education, Women and Child Development, Health and Family Welfare Ministry and Ministry of Tribal Affairs, and we are focusing about the inclusive growth of children with special needs, and not focusing on rote and memory based learning but on analytical and conceptual thinking. So that is how we are moving forward towards development. We are also talking about intermingling social studies and humanities with sciences. So previously a student with physics could not opt for music, let's say. Physics would opt for mathematics, but now you can have combinations of physics going in with music. So there is an approach for interdisciplinary development that could be done. 4-year B.Ed courses, which is an integrated teachers education program, would be released. Similarly, more focus would be done on institutional autonomy, bringing in structural development of the institutions, good governance among institutions, and freedom for entry and exit of courses. So you could complete one course in one university and shift to another university for next semester or next set of courses. Also, there would be creation of National Research Foundation, which is very, very important to avoid kind of delays and lack of concentration towards research activities in India, and high focus on vocational education, which is as of now below the basic level as compared to other nations across the globe. The next important development that we have seen is in the field of GIS, which is Geographical Information System. Now the idea is to capture, store and collect data with the position on the earth. So let's say I talk about this surface of land, and on this surface of land I have a map for vegetation, I overlay it with transport, I overlay it with the green belt, the forest cover, I overlay it with the water availability, and then try to find out which region is best optimum for what. Similarly, this GIS, why it has been discussed right now, the reason being the Arogya Setu app. So the Arogya Setu app, the implementation of this app has come up basically by the Departments of Science and Technology using GIS, where patients within 1 kilometer radius would be located, and you would be made aware about how many COVID patients are around you. So that is an app that is being used to monitor and understand the expanse of the disease or the pandemic in your region. Similarly, we have Bharat Maps as one of the leading examples, school GIS, postal GIS, bank GIS, telecom GIS as some of the services that are being provided. There is also a focus on a single window clearance system. Now this focuses on bringing certain categories in line, let's say pollution or land leasing, clearance for environment that you require for establishing an industry, or so on and so forth. So if you want to prioritize something, if you want to have knowledge about infrastructure about something, you can easily get those through the GIS. So there is definitely a huge scope of development and expansion along with GIS. So bringing in technology with daily lives is something that is very, very important, and GIS can help you sail through to have better prediction of, let's say, delivery time, food orders that are being done, healthcare facilities, online orders that are being done, and creating a kind of faster communication route between a buyer and a seller in simple terms. So GIS is definitely an essential component, and most of the GIS land use monitoring has been done through BISAG, which is the Bhaskaracharya Institute for Geoinformatics based in Gandhinagar, along with the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. So that was it for your Yojana, a very, very important edition that we have covered, a very applicative section for your GS paper 4. So don't miss this before your mains preparation begins. We would be covering many more interesting topics and case studies. Some of those we have already done for your GS paper 4. So just check out the playlist for the same and let us know in the comments if you require any specific topic that should be covered on priority. Have a wonderful day ahead.